Hello, my name is David Satterwhite, and today we will be exploring the social movement of Black Lives Matter. When I first reviewed this assignment, I knew that I wanted to do Black Lives Matter, probably because as an African American male, it was most relevant to me. But before I began my research, I kind of did a self-assessment and asked myself, do you really know what Black Lives Matter is? So I decided to do some preliminary research, and I found that about 3 in 10 Americans, that's about 31%, say they understand the goals of Black Lives Matter movement extremely or very well. 4 in 10 say they understand the goals somewhat well, and 27% say they don't understand the goals too well or at all well. So I would say I would have fell either in that 4 in 10 category, or maybe even in that 27% category. But I think this shows that I was pretty much in good company when it comes to understanding the goals of Black Lives Matter. Now let's look at the history of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is a civil rights movement that originated from a hashtag campaign on social media in 2013. It was founded by organizers Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi. It was created in response to the acquittal of George Zimmerman in the Trayvon Martin case. And if you recall, this was the case where Zimmerman was found not guilty of second-degree murder of Trayvon Martin, and he was an unarmed black high school student who Zimmerman shot and killed. The Black Lives Matter movement has helped organize rallies and protests in response to racial injustice, including police brutality against black people. We can see their efforts in the cases of Eric Gardner, Michael Brown, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, all of which have died by the hands of police brutality. The Black Lives Matter movement differed from past civil rights movements in a couple of different ways. First, unlike past civil rights movements that were usually led by a central figure like Martin Luther King, Black Lives Matter does not have a single leader, but it is a grassroots movement with various chapters that address key issues in their various communities. Also, Black Lives Matter has a broader scope by also addressing injustices of other affected groups, including the gay and trans community. But the key difference of Black Lives Matter is the use of technology and social media. This cannot be understated. This movement has shown how the new generation of social movements are linked to social media. More than 44 million Black Lives Matter hashtags and tweets currently exist on Twitter today. To demonstrate how powerful social media was to the Black Lives Matter movement compared to other civil rights movements without it, I will read this excerpt from Wired.com, which eloquently puts things in perspective. In the 1960s, if you were a civil rights worker stationed in the Deep South and you needed to get some urgent news out to the rest of the world, word of a beating or an activist arrest or some brewing state of danger, you would likely head straight for a telephone. From an office or a phone booth in hostile territory, you would place a call to one of the major national civil rights organizations, but you wouldn't do it by dialing a standard long distance number. That would involve speaking first to a switchboard operator, who was bound to be white and who might block your call. Instead, you dial the number for something called a wide area telephone service or WATS line. Like a 1-800 line, you would dial a WATS number from anywhere in the region, and the call would patch directly through to the business or organization that paid for the line. In this case, say the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. On the other end of the line, another civil rights worker would be ready to take down your report, and the others pouring in from phones scattered across the South. The terse, action-packed write-ups would then be compiled into a mimeograph, what Watts reports, mailed out to the organization leaders, the media, the Justice Department, lawyers, and other friends of the movement across the country. In other words, it took a lot of infrastructure to live tweet what was going on in the streets of the Jim Crow South. The Black Lives Matter movement does not have one main leader or adhere to a strict hierarchy. It's made up of local groups called chapters, and each chapter focuses on the particular issues of racial justice that are important to that community. There is a larger group called the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation that helps support these chapters by providing resources and advice. The Black Lives Matter movement is greatly concerned with awareness, and their tactics were centered around the goal of bringing attention to racial injustices, including the matter of police brutality. As stated, social media was a significant vehicle to raise awareness, but also the Black Lives Matter movement used the arts to convey their messages as well. An example of this was the creation of the Mirror Casket, which was a virtual representation that challenged everyone to reflect on the issue of police brutality and racism, and what role they can play to bring about change. The Black Lives Matter movement can be considered to be successful. It has achieved the goal of raising awareness on key issues that affect the lives of African Americans. It also shifted public opinion, especially among white people. Over 50% of white people think that law enforcement has racial issues. It also had an effect on policy and organizational changes within the police department, including implicit bias trainings, body-worn cameras, and bans on no-knock warrants. Being that the Black Lives Matter movement was successful, I would not change much. However, going back to my initial point, there are some individuals, including myself, that don't fully understand the goals of Black Lives Matter. One thing I would suggest for the movement is investing more time and resources to inform the public about what Black Matters is and what they are trying to accomplish. The more support the movement can gain, the more effective it will be in achieving its goals and promoting social change. So what are the implications for the social work practice and practitioners? The Black Lives Matter movement has demonstrated that despite progress, racism still exists. Social workers must acknowledge that service users in our fields of practice will likely be affected by the racial injustices that are ingrained in our society. Using my field of child welfare as an example, we can see the effects of racial inequality in the disproportionate amount of minority families that are affected by the child welfare system. Further, social workers must commit to a process of ongoing self-reflection so that we do not bring racial biases into practice. Racial bias in the field of social work may re-traumatize the clients that we serve. We must also commit to an anti-racist practice which acknowledges that racism and discrimination exist and taking personal action to stop all forms of racism in our circle of influence. Lastly, in the process of engagement, we must implement a teaching learning model to guide our interactions with affected communities and individuals. By listening to narratives and personal stories, we give meaning to people affected by racial injustice.